engage, disrupt, adapt, repeat. You're listening to Pure Reinvention, the podcast for curious people.
The role of the navigator is one of the most critical skill sets in the Pure Reinvention process. While we have identified the 5 key steps, what we really haven't spent a lot of time talking about yet is how we move from step to step to step, and how the navigator, in their unique set of skill sets, is able to take the beginning and run it clear through to a deliverable end. Misty, the navigator is probably the most underutilized role so far in this reinvention process, and why is that?
That's a good question. I've asked myself that a lot. I think it's a lot of the we're in the age of do-it-yourself, that everybody can figure it out and they go forward until they figure it out, or at least come close to figuring it out. And I think that it's a lost art to look for that sort of guidance and mentorship from a colleague that can really help you go through the process.
You know, that's a really interesting point. Not only maybe perhaps as a society, with everything becoming very independent, with all of the tools we have to do our own work. But I'll even give you another thought to ponder, and that is, I think as you get higher and higher in leadership expectations within a company, within an association, you become more and more alone in your responsibilities and your role, and you don't really have anyone to share those understandings and characteristics with. And so therefore you end up kind of being unto an island all by yourself, and you then kind of expect that that's your role, is to kind of figure it out. And you spend enough time in that space where your entire responsibility is to figure it out, and pretty soon you become resistant to other people helping you, because that somehow shows that you're not capable. Yet what I have learned, and it's taking me a period of time to really learn that, is that's not necessarily true. That actually the best leaders have the capacity to ask for help, have the capacity to bring in an outside perspective that is a little bit more unbiased in their review of the information, and more importantly, brings in experiences which adds to the ability for that executive to deliver greater and more sustainable results over a longer period of time.
Totally. I think that without seeking those outside perspectives, you aren't really cashing in on the full capacity that you can grow. And just having somebody else to share ideas with and build upon gives you a brand new opportunity. And it's sort of, you don't even know where it could lead, but it's usually going to be better than when you're left to your own devices.
In a lot of the podcasts that we've already had, we have really spent a lot of time talking about the value of collaboration. And the value of collaboration and the opportunities that brings within an association. Probably no more evident is that opportunity available than to the key leader as a key individual. Not the collaboration in the association and within the ranks and within all the divisions and within all the departments or within the membership, but that collaboration opportunity to the key executive to bring in someone they can engage in, have a conversation out loud about the realities of the business, learn from other experiences that may exist that other individual may have, and then together begin to have a conversation where you begin to chart out what are those next steps, not in a vacuum, but out loud, where you can begin to get some feedback and you can begin to get a better understanding of whether your ideas really have some merit. I had a chance for someone to teach me this very valuable lesson, and it very simply is this. When you have the conversation in your own mind and you don't have a chance to vet it out with an outside perspective, it all makes sense. But if you had to take your decisions, your kind of your initiative, whatever your plan is, and you had to explain it to 10 people who had enough experience to be able to kind of solidly vet it out, what would their feedback be? Would their feedback be such that they would actually give you credibility to what you have done? Or would they kind of look at you with that confused look like it didn't make sense to them? And I think sometimes as leaders, we're afraid to say what we're beginning to develop outside of our own head because we're nervous of what that feedback is, and we're nervous that someone might be critical of it. Yet that feedback takes us to the next level.
And that I agree completely. That also outlines one of the characteristics that I think is most important in a navigator, and that has to be the navigator is a person that you trust, that you feel comfortable sharing those wacky ideas, the left field ideas, and taking those risks to bounce off your ideas or these possibilities with somebody, and trusting that their feedback is going to be informed and insightful.
Let's take and look at the history of even the role of a navigator, as people from the Midwest were ready to move to the West Coast, and yet they didn't, and they were unsure of the direction. They had a desire, but they didn't know how. And one of the things that they would do is they would engage in someone who actually knew how to get there. And so from that perspective, it's been very interesting for me to see how key leaders will engage in going in a direction to accomplish something without having had that direct experience. And so one of the things that has been very important to teach in the space of the navigator is to remember you must find someone who has that direct experience. We find that sometimes there's an academic understanding of what the pathway should look like. But I think many leaders have begun to understand that that academic approach maybe doesn't quite take into account the real objective, deliverable expectation that a board or your staff or your members may have, which is we have to get to this next destination. We can't just talk about it. We can't just put it into a strategic plan. But we really have to have the ability to get there. And it amazes me how many times we embark on a new journey and we don't really know how to get there, yet we kind of fake it until we make it. And yet that's not really the responsible way to move forward from a leadership role. We really have to think about the credibility that goes with faking it till you make it instead of just initiating that more outside perspective.
Because what is it that you always say? Begin with what in mind?
I think it's really, really critical, Misty. We have to remember, we have to start with the end in mind. If we have an idea of where we want to go, if we have some self-awareness that we all have certain limitations to what we know, if we're willing to go perhaps counterintuitive and say to someone that we trust, can you help me? Do you have experience in this area in which you might be able to share with me ways in which we can take my ideas, my industry knowledge, my marketplace awareness, and begin to share with me other experiences that you've had? Can you enhance my decision making? Can you help me miss some of the traditional potholes that people always find? So that the role of the navigator doesn't just become an extra cost or an extra burden, but it actually is an asset that unquestionably you would recommend to someone else because of the real world direct benefit of knowing the territory, knowing where you're going, and helping the executive who's never been in that space before have the confidence that there is a way to explore, discover, and understand the absolute correct pathway for that particular association.
And along those same lines, I think it's important to talk about that doesn't mean that the navigator is coming with all of the answers. But the navigator comes with questions and informed experiences and can help literally navigate you through the discovery process. I think so often when you look to hire an outside help or a consultant or find that right navigator, you want somebody that's plug and play. You want the answers immediately, because typically when you're looking for a navigator, it's because you're in that position where you need to figure something out now. But there's some value in going through that discovery process because there's not one answer that fits everyone. It's unique. You have to understand where you are today, where you want to go tomorrow, and then figure out the navigation in between.
You know, there you bring up a really good point, Misty, and that is, I heard an executive say this, and I've never forgotten it, and that is the navigator, in understanding that you have to go through that process, recognizes the answer is in the process, that you can't just come in with a solution.
Right.
I mean, that would be very unfair to be able to say to anyone, here's what you need to do without knowing. But when the navigator can take you through that process, to help you be very objective about your realities, to help you understand perhaps possibilities that you hadn't even realized existed. The ability then to go through that process with a navigator dramatically enhances your ability to get to a new place.
And then you said the word, it's the process. And the navigator is dedicated to the process. Sometimes the executive gets so busy with whatever else is going on or whatever today's fire is that it's easy to fall away from the path and stay committed to the process. And the navigator's there to kind of nudge you back on that path and say, okay, well, you did that. Now let's redirect and keep focusing on the end.
You've made an interesting point, and I hadn't thought about it quite that way before, but I actually had it at the top of my list, and that is the navigator is the one accountable for that journey. When you don't know, it's easy to say you don't know, but the navigator comes with the process, and the navigator comes with the understanding that there's a start and there's an end. And you have to start with the end in mind, and the navigator then is going to move you through those steps. Now, clearly, sometimes the executive will resist. Many times the board or boards will resist. Because it's hard for people to accept the fact that what they're doing may not be as effective today as it once was. And so the role of the navigator, which is generally an outside resource, becomes very different in that it can say and encourage in ways in which perhaps the internal employee cannot. And by being accountable to either the executive or to the board, and being able to engage in a very different way than if you are an employee, that ends up being very helpful in the end result.
Well, with that, and you basically described it perfectly, it's the objectivity that outside resource brings. That person doesn't have the love of this established tradition. They can say, hey, are we looking at this critically? Let's stay objective, not just keep our subjective reasoning because we've been part of it for 15 years and it's something that we grew from nothing into a very functioning thing.
In the experience that we've had here at Pure Reinvention, we would have to say, and many more times than not, when we've had a successful story to tell, somewhere there's a navigator. And my guess is in almost every success story that exists, you're able to find a navigator. And always remember, if you're ready for a change, make it a change that lasts. Make it Pure Reinvention.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Pure Reinvention. Keep the conversation going and get alerts when new podcasts are up by following us on Twitter at Pure Reinvention or sign up for our mailing list at purereinvention.com.